My fascination with the game of Senet grew out of my interest both in Egyptology and in board games. I had never heard of it until I was in high school in the late 1970s when the Great Tutankhamun exhibition was touring the United States. We could not attend the exhibition, but my parents gave me the exhibit catalog as a Christmas gift. In the catalog, I saw photographs of the pharaoh's several game boards, and I was intrigued. As it happened, a few game companies at that time produced a commercial Senet board, hoping to take advantage of the popularity of the exhibition. I saw one in a department store and said to my parents, "Oh my goodness, please, please, I want that." And my mom looked at it and looked at me and said, "Dear, who are you going to play that with?" I said, "Oh, that didn't quite occur to me." So I went many years wishing, I knew more about Senet, but not really knowing very much and wanting to know more. That was kind of where it lay. Fast forward to 2001, as I was engaged to my husband, and we were talking about games, and I said, there's this one I've always wanted to know about, but I don't know how to play it. And I mentioned that I was interested in Senet. And Tavon smiled and said to me, "I have one. Would you like to learn how?" The rest is history, and it was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. So I've been involved and interested in this for a long, long time, and the more I found out, the more I wanted to know. And so now you get to find out what I found out. This talk is Reaching the House of Beauty, the role of Senet in Egyptian life. As far as I've been able to find out, Senet is the world's oldest board game. That there are extant copies of, or extant boards and pieces that can be dated. It is possible that there may be existing boards for Mancala or Owari or some of the Central African Stones and Pits game. But as far as I know, I don't know that any of them have been found that is older than Senet. Senet is so old that it not only is older than the pyramids, it's older than the pharaohs. It goes back well into the pre-dynastic period. And here on the right are actually the hieroglyphs with which you write the word Senet. It has two determiners. The first determiner is the glyph for wood, and then the three single sound letters SNT, and then another determinative, which is in fact a drawing of the game itself. And we know how ancient this is because, first, the earliest known partial Senet board, this one's broken, apparently, it's not complete, were found in a pre-dynastic grave at El Mahasna around 3300 to 3200 BC. And the fact that the pieces are the same shape but different sizes tells us that this is actually a board and pieces for Senet and not something else. The earliest Senet sets, the only differentiation between the pieces is dimension. Later, much later, we see Senet pieces being of two different shapes and occasionally two different colors. But early on, the only difference was size. The other way that we know how really ancient this is that it is already a hieroglyph by the beginning of Dynasty 1. The earliest representation or drawing of the Senet board is actually the hieroglyph Men, which is part of the Nebti name of Hor-Aha, the first ruler of Dynasty 1. And the reason it's in his name is that his other name is Mene, or Menes, as the Greek call him. So it already exists, and it already is a meaningful thing that early. The fact that we already see the Senet board as a hieroglyph in Dynasty 1 indicates a couple things. First, that the game was already widespread in the society. It's not something just played in a limited area. It was familiar to everyone, or to at least a large proportion of the people. And even by Dynasty 1, the glyph in there isn't in Hor-Aha's name. It's not about the game. It has a separate, the game already has a meaning besides the game itself. Men means to remain, endure, to persevere. Even at this early date, it's more than just a game. It's already acquired a deeper layer or level of meaning, which means it's been around much, much longer than Dynasty 1. How long? No one really knows. And sort of an analogous idea in the West, in Europe, would be the idea of using not physical dice, but pictures of dice, or an image of playing cards, not to represent the game, but to represent a concept of fortune or luck or chance. And that's built into our language in idioms like dicey, to say that something is dicey, or oh, it's a crapshoot. No telling how that's going to turn out. Or talk about the luck of the draw. In the same way, the hieroglyph, or Senet already, the hieroglyph men already is showing that the game represents an idea besides the game itself. The earliest known tomb image of the whole board, with all its pieces, is in the 3rd dynasty. It's in a wall painting in the tomb of Hesire, and there's some interesting features about the board itself. The 30 squares are all there, and we can see, the star is where you start placing the pieces. There's a little U-turn there and a U-turn here to show that the direction of play alternates direction, and that there's something special about the last 4 squares. That they're numbered 4 and 1 indicate that that rule is very early established, that you have to play off of those with an exact throw, and that'll come up further on. But what's really useful is that along with the board, we also have a representation of the throw sticks and all the pieces, which are the same shape but of different size. Some other early Senet boards is this broken partial one in clay, either glazed clay or faience, and some faience pieces, which which probably don't belong to the same set, as they're not the same shape. But I think it's interesting that even the very early ones were already being made blue. It was very common that they were made in faience. Now, how do we know what we know? We know from tomb paintings how the initial setup was, that the pieces were set on the board in alternating squares. And we know from other tomb images that have text going with them. Essentially, it's a comic strip. The text here is a conversation between the 2 players. And frequently, this isn't so much of a conversation, but clearly the writing about something related to the game being played by the 2 ladies here. What we know about the rules and the gameplay, we also know from tomb images like this image of Pepi Ankh, because the dialogue includes things like, "Ah, I've gotten a 1. You won't beat me now," or something like that. Scholars have managed to glean tiny little bits of how the game works by looking at tomb paintings with text. But in order to talk about the meaning of the game and how it developed and how it became important, we do have to talk a little bit about how it's played and how the game itself works. This is a New Kingdom, 18th dynasty early, based on the iconography in the last 5 squares, and we'll talk about that going on, but this is a particularly handsome example with the colored decoration. Because there are no one ever wrote down rules for this. There are no, in all the tomb paintings that show Senet players, there's never anything in there about this, here is how you do this. There are no papyri about this is how the game is played. So the assumption is that it was so familiar in Egyptian society that nobody ever bothered to write it down. They must have been, it was something everyone knew. And just an example of how ubiquitous it is not just portable boards and pieces, but the large number of 30 square Senet grids carved into roofs and floors by workmen, or scratched into, not walls, but scratched into floors of rooms where people just said, oh, hey, let's have a game, and created their board on the spot. A useful book that I was talking about this whole concept, that what happens when everybody knows something, is a book by Elizabeth Barber and Paul T. Barber, talking about the origin of mythology and how the human mind shapes myth. And they mention several key principles, one of which they called the silence principle, which is what everyone is expected to know already is not explained in so many words. When something is familiar to no one ever writes it down because everyone knows. Unfortunately, there's a corollary to the silence principle, which is the Lethe effect. What is never said or never written down may eventually be forgotten completely. The knowledge of it dies with the people who knew it, and there's nothing left to tell later generations what this knowledge was. And because Senet is a really prime example of both of those, the rules and the gameplay have had to be reconstructed by scholars, which means there are several versions out there of how people think this worked. One scholar who's written more about it than anyone else I've seen is Timothy Kendall, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And his book, called Passing Through the Netherworld, is one of my main sources. And so the rules I'm going to describe here are the rules that Kendall formulated based on his research. I'd mentioned already the board is divided into 30 squares. Each player had a number of pieces, usually an odd number, 5 or 7. I've never seen any drawings of a Senet board where the players had even number of pieces each that differed from each other in size, color, or shape. The pieces themselves were called in Egyptian ikhbao, or dancers. Each of the squares was called a house. So a house is 30 peru. The object of the game was to be the first one to play all one's pieces off the board. And for this reason, Senet is sometimes said to be an early ancestor of backgammon. I'm not certain I buy that, but it's an interesting theory. One interesting thing about it is The moves are determined by throw sticks as opposed to dice. It's a kind of binary dice with only two faces. The players counted how many flat sides or how many undecorated sides faced up. So they would throw these 4 flat sticks onto the ground and determine by which sides faced up how many spaces the player got to move. Throw sticks could be split reeds or split just twigs or sticks, flat sticks that were painted on one side. But another word, the Egyptian word for throw sticks was fingers, because they're roughly the shape of your fingers. And we see some that are even painted that way or decorated that way with fingernails. In later periods, besides throw sticks, some later sets are they used to determine moves by throwing knuckle bones instead of throw sticks. And knuckle bones have 4 different faces, so they could determine the moves by which sides of the knuckle bones were facing up. The throw sticks were counted for moves this way: 1 flat side, 2 flat sides, 3 flat sides, 4 flat sides up were that many squares. But if all the counting sides faced down, then the player got more than 4 squares. Some say 5, some say 6. Different scholars have different ideas about that. What's really interesting about this is that if you're playing a game with 6-sided dice, then the odds are the same of rolling any particular number. That's not so with the flat throw sticks. Probability comes into it. 2 and 3 are the commonest number that would be thrown, so there's no special bonus for those. 1, 4, and 5 occur less often, so there's additional value. Throwing 1, 4, or 5 earns players an additional throw. And that apparently seems to continue. If you throw 1, 4, or 5 again, you get to make those moves and roll again. Whereas a throw of 2 or 3 ends the player's turn. They get that one turn, and then the play passes to their opponent. Some scholars have suggested that they started with the board empty, and that they have to throw sticks to place their pieces on the board in the first place. However, no one has ever found a tomb painting or an image of 2 players facing each other across an empty board. The only paintings that show the beginning of the game show all the pieces placed alternately across the board. And as far as I know, it's not known how they determined who the first player was. The gameplay proceeds as follows. Landing on an opponent's undefended piece cause the pieces either to change places or to push the piece that's been displaced back to square one. 2 of the same pieces on adjacent squares defend each other. Neither one can be moved or displaced, but you can move around them. 3 of the same pieces adjacent, same player's pieces side by side, however, are a blockade. They cannot be attacked or passed. So that's a good way to stop your opponent from making much progress. Play began in the upper left, where we saw the star etched in the square in the 3rd Dynasty board, and proceeded along an S-shaped path to the end of the board, and the last 5 squares are significant and are usually marked with special markings, which we'll talk about a little later. So in some later boards, square 15 here also has a special significance. In really early boards, the last 5 squares are marked like this, which looks rather different from the way that we see them in the New Kingdom. Square 26, fairly early on, was marked with the hieroglyph Nefer. The square immediately following Nefer was marked with an X. X marks the spot. And then the last 3 squares are marked with 3 strokes, 2 strokes, and either 1 stroke or nothing. So the meaning of the last 5 squares really early was, oh, good, land here. X, don't land here. And then 3, 2, and 1, that's the roll you have to get in order to leave the board. Otherwise, you're stuck there. 26, marked with Nefer, is possibly a safe square. Some scholars believe that you couldn't be attacked, that a piece landing on there was safe from attack, but we don't know that definitely. What we do know is that it must be landed on. You cannot pass over it. You cannot continue past it. All players' pieces must land on Nefer, and it must be reached by an exact throw. 27, the one marked with an X, just meant something bad. It was bad luck. Landing there possibly removed the piece back to square 1, or some other unfortunate outcome. 28 through 30, as we already talked about, is marked 3, 2, and 1, showing that you need an exact throw of that number to leave the board surface. If you're sitting on square 2 and you roll a 4, there's some dispute about whether you could leave the board, but apparently not, at least in the early. They need to be played off the board altogether. So, time passes on. By the early New Kingdom, now it looks a little different. And we see that a more ornate board. Square 26 has 3 Nefer glyphs, forming the word Neferu, and it was called Per Nefer. Now, if you know something about mummification, Per Nefer is the house of the embalmers. That's where anyone who became that's where they worked. That's where every Egyptian hoped they would be, the house of beauty. Now, by this time, that's square 27, which was just bad luck, don't land here. By New Kingdom, it was marked with water, indicating the Nile, indicating the void of chaos before the beginning. But now this all starts to make, so at this point now the end squares have become a metaphor. This all starts to make a certain metaphoric sense on more than one level. Because all pieces must reach square 26, the house of beauty, in order to continue with the game, is basically the same idea as you can't get into the afterlife, into the field of reeds without stopping in the real Per Nefer, the real house of beauty. By this time, landing on the water square, instead of getting kicked off the board and having to start again on square 1, they can be reborn on square 15, either with an Ankh, or sometimes square 15 is marked with the hieroglyphs for the goddess Heket, the goddess of rebirth. This is what we would call the classic Senet board, and the commercially produced one that a lot of us have is a copy of this one. 3 and 2 have now been replaced by Sons of Re Atum and 3 ibises. And the last square is blank, but sometimes it has the raw disc. And I have an example of one of those later on. Tutankhamun, as I mentioned earlier, apparently was a great fan aficionado for Senet. His tomb has 4 Senet boards. The famous and elegant one is a small table with drawers and lion paws. But there were several smaller ones. A small one like this with very little, with a lot of decoration, that's quite small. This one has 2 playing surfaces. The other side of it has the board for 20 squares. And many Senet boards of the box type have 20 square boards on the reverse side. And here is one of the ones showing not actual knuckle bones, but carved ivory or wood knuckle bones. Here is another one of the New Kingdom 18th Dynasty boards, where the square 1 is the sun disk. It's not blank. Here is the upper surface of the table, one with the drawers that belong to Tutankhamun. Notice now square 15 has the glyph Ankh in it, showing that that's the square on which you were reborn after falling into square 27. So that's where things were at the end of the 18th dynasty. Tutankhamun's board is probably the finest of its type. And you notice by now also that pieces are now 2 different shapes. They're differentiated both by color and shape, not just dimensions. However, after him, things get strange. Suddenly, in the 19th dynasty, we get Senet scenes that don't look anything like Senet scenes at any time earlier. In the older ones, as you saw in the 6th dynasty and the 11th dynasty, Senet tomb scenes showed people playing with each other and talking about the game, or gloating over each other, or bewailing their fate at rolling a 2. But following the Amarna period, then we get game scenes that look like this. This is not like any tomb paintings of Senet at any time earlier. Here's Nefertari in the very famous tomb painting of Nefertari in the Senet board, and she's alone. Here are, from the Papyrus of Ani, the Book of the Dead, here's Ani and his wife, and they don't have a human opponent either. Senet is not just a game now. Now it's become this metaphysical concept, this funerary motif. The board seems to represent the journey through the netherworld. And the player is playing against whom? The gods? Anubis? We don't know. This new version of Senet is intended for the dead. The Book of the Dead suggests that the unseen opponents are all of the enemies of the deceased that we see in paintings of the journey, of the 12 hours journey through the Duat. The image in the tomb of Senedjem makes that even a little clearer, that there's no one on the other side of the board. And Kendall postulates that, and from inscriptions it sounds like the players are saying that they must win. They must win in order to come forth by day. So they're not playing against the gods, they're playing against whatever dark things live in the Duat, presumably. So the function, the significance of Senet changed, the board changed too. And in these 19th dynasty boards, we start seeing And this one is very badly worn, so you can't see it very well. But each square is decorated with specific images that relate to the journey through the netherworld and what the player has accomplished by passing that square. And Kendall spends a good deal of time in his book discussing this. First, just the last 5 squares were marked with religious imagery. The last square now is not just a sun disk or blank. Now we get the falcon, possibly Horus. The 2 figures are now 2 gods or goddesses. So yes, the decoration of the board became suddenly much more elaborate and fraught with meaning. And as I said later, all 30 squares are ornamented in that way. However, this didn't last. That seems to have only really been thought of or been a concept in the 19th and 20th dynasties. By the time we get to Ramesses III, we go back to having normal-looking tomb paintings of 2 people playing Senet against each other. This happens to be Ramesses III and one of his daughters, who is holding out a lotus to him while they're playing. And the boards went back to the simpler style without all of the metaphysical ornamentation. And we see some boards of that type and some boards of the earlier 18th dynasty sort. In his writings, Herodotus tried to explain how the game worked, but according to Kendall, what Herodotus says about it doesn't really make a lot of sense from what we know now, but Herodotus had not seen all of the tomb paintings and everything talking about the game. Clearly, he only knew what people told him several centuries after the fact. As far as we know, Senet continued to be played into the 26th and later dynasties, but that funerary design board was no longer being used then. So that seems to have been an ephemeral concept. The much later ones go back to the simpler board design. The very last known Senet scene painted in a tomb is in the Ptolemaic period, and I did not find a graphic or a photograph of this, only a line drawing in Kendall's book. But there's an interesting mention of relic in a Greek papyrus from Oxyrhynchus that is describing this game of 30 squares, and the person writing about it said, one of these squares is dedicated to a goddess Fernophis, which clearly is the Greek attempt to transliterate Pernefer, or I suppose after an elaborate game of telephone that several generations later, Fernophis is what they thought it was called. And with that, we would think that Senet had disappeared entirely. But it didn't. As archaeology rediscovered Egypt, and Champollion and Thomas Young and others began to be able to read Egyptian text, then they discovered Senet 18 centuries later. But it was really the ones in the tomb of Tutankhamun that made us aware of it now. And people have been making commercially produced Senet sets ever since. This one is one of the older ones. I believe that's actually the one that I saw in the 70s. This one was produced by a company called Kadako, And theirs is one of the funerary type, where all 30 squares are decorated with meaningful images and text. One that I have, and many of you probably also have. This is the one from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which includes Kendall's book and is also of the funerary 19th dynasty form. And this is a modern Senet game produced by a company called Mazeology. I found this online, but I have not found a copy that's actually for sale. The box art's pretty neat, though. So, as I was saying, Senet began to be marketed as a toy for children. Yes, buy this for your kids. In the late 70s during the Tutankhamun Museum exhibit. But that's not the first ones available. The actual first commercial version of Senet was by Parker Brothers. Parker Brothers? Of all people. In 1946. The box art is really neat, but I think they must have been reading Herodotus's description of how the game works, because they didn't understand it at all. It's got 30 squares. That's about the only, and 5 pieces per person. That's about all they got right. It uses 6-sided dice, and the board is a mirror. The 5 squares are on each end of the board, and and their rules basically set it up like Chinese checkers. The players start on opposite ends of the board, and the goal is to move through each other to the other end of the board. And just to be different, the pieces are on long, thin stems, like the pieces for hounds and jackals. So it's a good try and very creative, but they didn't have a lot of the information and resources that were available later on. Northwest Trading makes the one that's currently available, and I mentioned Timothy Kendall at the Museum of Fine Arts, and that his book is one of the main sources I used for this talk, as well as for the article that I wrote back in 2005. So if you want to play Senet now, you either have to find someone who has a board or is willing to play with you, but especially useful given the current circumstances of the time. There are a number of downloadable apps for Senet. There are several more than there used to be. And there are a few sites where we can play it online. Some of those have disappeared. Some of the ones that I used to know no longer exist. This particular image is from the version called Senet Deluxe for iPhone and iPad. In my opinion, it's the best one. It has sound effects. When you throw the throw sticks, it awards the extra roll for certain throws. It's a pretty good, pretty close approximation to the way Kendall explained it. The British Museum at one point had the online Senet game that could be played on their children's activity page. The rules are still there, but the interactive game is gone. And the only other one I know of that's actually online that you can play it against the computer is this one on a website called Paleoglot. He talks about many different types of ancient historical games and puzzle and language things. It's a good site, but I also think that his is the best online version of Senet if you want to play it against the computer. These are a few things that I have not found out, the questions I don't have answers to. Why did this suddenly develop a whole extra dimension of meaning and significance in the 19th dynasty? Why did it, what was it about the post-Amarna period that made them suddenly decide that Senet meant something additional or something more than it had before? Is Senet really an ancestor of backgammon? Backgammon originated in India. That's the chief reason that I don't think that it does. They share a couple of features, but I don't think that's my take. I don't think they're a descendant. I think they may be part of the same family of race games. What I really would like to know is, where did it start? The earliest version we have already looks recognizably, or almost, like Senet boards later. How did it originate with all of its essential features in place that early? And then last, just a couple closing thoughts. I think the thing I love about it, and what makes it so unique, is that we can play the same game. We can participate in the culture of these people that we admire. We can pick up our throw sticks and enjoy the same pastime that all these great people of the past played. I don't know any other activity except hunting or fishing that we can do that Tutankhamun did. And that's my ending splash screen with a couple of lioness-headed pieces. Here I have to give a shout out to my husband Tavon. He did the rendering for the opening and closing splash screens, and he added the lioness-headed pieces because Timothy Kendall's book has a photograph of lioness-headed pieces with Hatshepsut's name on them. Her cartouche is carved on their little heads, and that set is in the Louvre. I would kill for a picture of that set, but I have looked and looked, and I've never found any images of it. And with that, I will close. My last two slides are sources I used. I'm not going to go through that now, but since this will get posted online at some point, I wanted to be sure it include the references page so that anyone can follow it up who wishes.
That was great, Rhonda. Let me speak on behalf of the whole audience, since I've got them all muted right now, but we'll get them all open here in just a little bit. First, let me relay a couple of questions.
Sure. Shall I unshare?
Sure. That way your picture will be there for everybody. Okay. First one is from Jan Stremi.
Yes.
And the depictions in Ani and Nefertari seem to have the pieces arranged by size, all tall pieces together. Most others show alternated pieces. Would this be merely the stage of the game, or is it significant to the more ritualized play of the time?
I'm thinking that it's... I don't know of any situation. I can't imagine, though it's theoretically possible, I guess, that you could, at some point in the play, have all of one player's pieces and then all the other players' pieces. But at that point, it kind of becomes an impasse. It's an unplayable position. So I don't think that would actually exist. I think that's something on the order of, this is just my conjecture, mind you. The way we see offering scenes in tombs with everything stacked on top of each other to represent distance, I think that's just that they're representing that all of Nefertari's pieces are the short ones, and the ones who are being played by the gods of the Duat or the other side. I don't know.
Okay.
It's more a way of depicting the duality, and the fact that the pieces are not arranged in any kind of position that they would be in actual gameplay, I think in a way reinforces the idea that this is a metaphorical game.
Okay. Okay, next question from Jim Loudermilk.
Sure.
I guess it's a statement asking for your comment.
Mm.
Throwing 2 dice, 7 has the highest probability. So maybe Senet is the precursor of craps. I don't buy that, or backgammon either.
Yeah, I don't know. Throw sticks are interesting because they're binary dice. It's like, and if you were playing Senet and you, with the lovely set that Jay Phillips made and that Rodney cheerfully distributed to everybody, and when I gave this talk in 2005, whoops, that's the wrong box. When I gave this talk in 2005, I printed out a bunch of boards and I handed out sets of popsicle sticks that I had painted on one side with markers. But if you're playing the game, you can use 4 pennies. The odds come out the same. You just have to decide, heads, 4 heads, so, heads or tails. But the odds with 2-sided dice come out very differently with 4 2-sided sticks, 2-sided things. Comes out differently than with a D6, with a normal D6 die, where each side has an equal chance of, each number has an equal chance of being thrown. So yeah, I don't think craps comes into there either.
Okay, thanks.
Oh,
next question. Go ahead. Were you going to say more?
Something that just popped back into my mind. Some games in Central Africa are played where the dice are cowrie shells. And they're counted if the round side is up or the flat side is up. So I'm thinking that 2-sided, binary die concept seems to be something possibly unique to the African continent.
Ah. Okay, next question from Richard Ottolini.
Sure.
Does Pharaoh Seti play a Senet-like game in the Ten Commandments movie?
I don't know because I haven't seen it in a million years, but it's entirely possible. I wasn't paying attention. But it's possible that they did.
Okay.
If the film so you'd have to go and look. But yeah, if the filmmakers did their homework, yeah. Oh, Rodney says, no, that was Hounds and Jackals. Fascinating. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to watch the movie again. Actually look for it.
Do we know, from Lane Andrus, do we know the order of the pieces upon start?
Other than that they were alternating. 1 and 1. We don't know. I've never seen anything that suggests back then who went first. My thought, in chess, white plays first. In a lot of the electronic or modern Senet sets, they'll say, oh, whichever player gets, cones moves first or spools moves first. My thought is it's whoever rolled the highest through the highest number with the throw sticks goes first, and they can pick whichever set of pieces they want. And I forgot that I actually have the Parker Brothers set. I glommed onto it on eBay at one point. You can't see it very well because of my lighting, but yes, it's exactly like if Egyptian, it's the natural love child between Senet and Chinese checkers.
Okay, last written question.
Sure.
If you have, this is from Larry Frederick. If you have 5 pieces and you throw your sticks, do you think the number of moves can only be used to move 1 piece, or could you divide the moves between 2 or more pieces?
Brilliant question. If you throw your sticks and roll 2 or 3, that's the only move you get. if you roll 1, 4, or 5, then you can move whichever piece you want to move, but you can't split up the 4 and move this one too and that one too. But you can move your piece and then roll again. And if you get a 2 or a 3, then you move that move, and then the turn ends and it goes to the other player. But if you get 1, 4, or 5 again, you make that move and keep going.
Ah, okay.
I have played it where I or my opponent got 3 or 4 turns in a row that way.
Okay, question. Is it possible that the funerary version could have been used for something on the order of divination or tarot or something like that?
I don't know. I don't think, which is kind of interesting, I don't know about that. Like I said, there are some physical boards that are decorated that way. It's certainly possible that, you know, the physical players playing on that physical board might have been. I have not found any definitive sources that say that. I don't think we would know that unless there were texts written around the side of the board, around the sides of the box, or text in a painting or something that would indicate that. So yeah, I haven't the faintest idea, but it wouldn't surprise me. Anybody else? Hey, I actually managed to do that under the time limit. What do you know?
I was trying to stuff a question into the Q&A block, but it dropped me off partway through.
Sorry.
Do we have any clear-cut evidence that this game was played not only by the pharaohs and the elite, but the peasants as well?
It's everywhere. There are one kind of evidence is direct, the other kind is indirect. And some of you lovely people who have been to Egypt, I have not yet, provided me the data that there are all over the place. You can see little impromptu 30 square grids scratched into the floor of something, scratched into a roof tile. You know, so the workmen are sitting up there on the roof playing it. But also the fact that we see it made of all kinds of material. You know, cheap clay, pieces of wood, and then the really fancy ones. But the other indirect evidence is simply that it had already become a hieroglyph by the first dynasty. So people had to, even if they couldn't read and write, could recognize and say, oh, I know what that is. So it's sort of indirect. It seems to have been kind of all walks of life. And there are apparently many zillions of game pieces that have been found and have turned up in antiquities markets for decades. So yeah.
That answers it. I figured that workmen who were working on tombs and whatnot for the well-to-do would probably be exposed to it by virtue of the fact of their close association with the aristocracy, but it wasn't clear to me that the peasants would necessarily be playing it back in the villages by their lonesome.
Right. Well, the fact that it's not only found, scratched into the sort of surfaces where workmen were working, but it's been found, cut or scratched or inscribed just on roofs of houses. You can see people sitting up there, in the shade of whatever tree, playing it. But yeah, it seems to have been all over the place. And if I ever get the chance to go there, one of the things I will do, like my friend who collects rabbit things and manages to spot rabbits everywhere, I'm going to have an inner eye looking out for 30 square grids in the wild.
Do we have any idea when it ceased to be played?
I think, the last painting in a tomb that we know of was in the Ptolemaic period. So the Greeks don't seem to have wiped it out, but my guess is the Romans did, because we see nothing after whatever, I don't know which dynasty that last tomb painting of Petosiris was, but I don't think Manetho talks about it, and there's nothing from the Roman period at all. And if they hadn't, then either the Copts or the 6th century advent of Islam, especially Islam with their prohibition of images of people, would have put the kibosh on that. But yeah, the last one that I know about, the last evidence of it that I know of is the Ptolemaic.
Hey, Rhonda.
Yeah.
David Pepper. When I was at the Serapeum one time, I took a wisp broom along and I was brushing sand and dust off the walls and things, looking for tool marks.
Yeah.
And I found the 30 squares there right in the Serapeum.
Oh my gosh.
It was actually fairly deeply cut. It's
Wow.
about maybe 1/8 of an inch cut into the stone. So
In the floor?
Yeah, it was in the Serapeum. It was under the sand because I was using wisp broom brushing it away.
I was saying in the floor, not the wall. In the floor.
Yeah. But I was looking for tool marks and I came across this and said, oh, I know what that is.
Oh, lucky you.
So a quick, my quick pet theory, and I developed this after your last lecture.
Oh, thanks.
The Senet board represents a month perfectly. The month on the Egyptian calendar had 3 10-day weeks, and so I'm thinking of that. There's some nice parallels there, but I don't want to go into it. But
oh my gosh, I never thought of that. That's marvelous.
Yeah, I wish more people would look at it that way, or at least investigate that.
Yes, and because that 30 squares, yeah, how did they decide on 30? Because they did really early. Even by 2nd or 3rd dynasty, we have the 30 squares. That has been true for a long time. Wow, that never occurred to me to tie it up to the 30-day month. But that also makes an interesting kind of sense, because the game Senet turns up actually in a Egyptian myth of the days upon the year. That Ra was forbidding. No, Ra. Yes, was forbidding Amun. Was forbidding. Sorry, I'm half awake. Who? Mut? Newt.
I think it was
Newt from giving
Newt.
birth. That she could not give birth on any day of the year. And in desperation, because she is pregnant, she says to Thoth, what am I going to do? And Thoth thinks about it a while and goes to see the god of the moon, Khonsu, who is an inveterate gambler, and gambles with him at Senet. And for each game that he wins 1 day's worth of moonlight from Hansu. So that's how, from going from 12 30-day months, we then have 12 30-day months plus 5 days, on each of which of those days the 5 gods who are the children of Ra were born. That's a drastic condensation, but so yeah, the fact that it's already tied up with Thoth gaming with Hansu for a day's worth of moonlight. Yeah, that connection had gone past me. Thank you.
Intense game of Senet right now.
Ah.
Oh, wow.
Oh. And which app is that one?
That's a great question. I just sent it to my friends because I'm gonna go ahead and buy it on Amazon and we're gonna play it together. But I don't know. It looks like
platform?
this.
Yeah. What
It's
platform?
on Apple, and I think it was like the 3rd or 4th one down.
Okay. I strongly recommend, I'll try that one, but do look into Senet Deluxe.
Okay.
For iOS. It's not free. I think it's $2.99.
I think this one cost a little bit. I've had it for a few years, and this is just what I've had.
Senet Deluxe, in my humble opinion, is the best one of the electronic versions. It's the best reproduction of real gameplay. Oh, cool.
That same game is available for Android, and I believe it is free on Android.
Nice.
Awesome.
Ooh, Skip Howard, what set is this you've got?
Someone asked me a long time ago to make a travel kit.
Ooh.
It's 2-sided, 3D printed. It was intended for my next tour to play in the bar.
Oh, nice. I did a fabric one on, beige fabric and zigzag stitch, and made the 30 squares and embroidered by hand the water and the nefer and so on, and then just got checkers from a nice wood checker set and gave that to my nephew one year.
I made mine when I was 12.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Wow, I love it.
I think Lane was trying to say something a little while back. Her sound flickered on and off.
Oh, I was just saying, oh, wow. They're such nice boards, all of you. And just to see the fabric one seemed really cool that you hand embroidered all those details.
Well, the only part I embroidered was the nefer and the water, and then 3, 2, and the circle. But it was my Christmas present for my nephew, so I can't show it off. Though I was thinking about making another one and putting it in the silent auction sometime.
That's a good idea. I think you should do that.
Okay.
Rhonda?
Yo.
Are there any African derivatives, modern African derivatives, by any chance, of the game?
I don't know. I have never seen anything. In various hunting up about Senet, the African board games I found are all variations of Mancala, stones and pits. I know there are some African games that use cowrie shells, either the flat side or the round side, as dice, but I've never seen any indication that Senet spread beyond Egypt. Though I imagine there are some in Kush or Meroe from later dynasties, but I don't know about it. It'd be worth hunting. I'd love to know, but I've not. If the information is out there, I haven't found it.
So Rhonda, I had thought about that change to the funerary ritual game
Yes.
that because of the Amarna period being such an upset, that they were trying to find something that was common to everybody culturally to reestablish the gods.
That's possible.
And that's why they went back to, came up with using Senet as a way to reestablish the old religion.
Yeah, and
because everybody knew how to play it, and so it was part of their lives already, and so they incorporated it.
Quite possible.
Might explain the 4 times the sets for King Tut too. That it was maybe a bigger deal for him than it was for some of the others.
Indeed, but yeah, we know for certain he personally had sets. We know Hatshepsut had her own set. At least some of the pieces are in the Louvre. And and I have never found it. I have searched what of the Louvre collection is online more than once, trying to find those, and with no luck.
I'll double check pictures I have that I took when I was there and let you know if I find anything.
I was going to say the same thing because I take pictures of things like that.
Fantastic. So I and other fans of herself would like to know that.
I sent you pictures from the Met. They have Hatshepsut playing pieces also.
Oh, do they? Marvelous. Yeah. Oh, how exciting.
So reason to check your email.
Indeed.